watched it. You guys did an amazing job. I left with so many questions, which I think is a good thing. So many like, okay, well, what can I do? Learning about it when it comes to land was the most surprising because I don't know. I just feel like one, I'm up north, so I don't know much about do a lot of Black people own land, like farmland up north? I'm not sure, which I'm hoping you guys can educate me. But why is this so important for us to have a will? And is there a more of an importance of a will if you have land, or does it not matter?
You want to take that,
I'll start and probably and I'll have Eternal yeah, and Eternal, you can follow. And Sharifa, we didn't, I saw you at Smith and Walensky, but I don't know that we formally met. But I'm Tharlyn Fox, and I'm the lead manager at John Deere. And so I run that organization at John Deere. But whether it's land, a home, jewelry, whatever it is, you have a will. And you want to have a will so that you're able to pass your assets on to a family member. And it isn't just for farmers, it is for landowners, for family. So you want to protect what you have. So that is why it is very important that you have the proper estate planning. So before I say your mom's an attorney, and I always say this when I talk to anyone, I don't play an attorney on TV. I'm not an attorney. So I always wanted to make sure that I say that, but it is very important that you create a will so that you protect your heirs and so that you protect your family and so that you have that proper estate planning. So you want to make sure that you designate what you have and making sure that that's properly passed on to your heirs so that you don't involve a court system, so that no one comes in and intrudes on your estate and then quite possibly come in and then there be some disruption and then come in and then have to partition that, sell off that. And so you don't want to have that, then go there and have that probate. So it is very important, regardless of whether it's land or assets, whatever that asset is, that you protect it.
So I think the real kind of like thing that kind of I guess jumped out at me when I was doing the project was the thinking behind land and why the will was important. And in these instances, I don't know what the judge's motivations are, but it kind of makes sense that if you have a piece of land and there's one part of the land is by some water and another part of the land may have, let's just say it's some oil on the land or whatever. And they say, well, how do you divide this land up equally? If I don't have a will or we don't have some way to say, okay, each of the children get this part. And then you could do that. But then if you get to a place where it's up for sale or auction, then it's kind of like you can divide the money, but you can't divide the land equally. So that's where it kind of gets touchy, is that what is the value of each particular section of the land, and how do you, if you don't have a will and you say you leave it to one or you leave it to, there was an instance where there was a family, I think it was the Spencer family, right, Tharlyn?
Spencer Hunter family, Hunter family.
Yeah. That family, they actually did give each member of the family a piece of land with a title to that section of the land. So however they decided to break up their land, that's what they did. But each of them had their own section and they had a title to it. But typically that's not the case. And so if it does go to get into the court system, as Tharlyn said, then you're up to the
discretion,
the discretion of the whoever's in charge there. And then most often they're like, hey, the equitable thing to do is to sell it and give you money because we can divide $100 up, but we can't divide $100.
Right. And keep in mind, when you do divide that, it is not typically market value, right? And so it's less than market value. It could be pennies on the dollar, because courts are not going to solve or resolve family disputes. The way that the court system is going to resolve a dispute is monetarily. That's the only way that we can resolve, or the way that our court system is going to resolve something, is to put a dollar amount on that. And so to do that, they're not going to necessarily go out and give you what you think or what the market value is. And so that's why it's so important, because heirs property is by far one of the most fragile ways of owning something. And one thing that I always like to tell people is that our ancestors, our great grandfathers, our ancestors, they really did think they were doing the right thing by leaving it to the family, by leaving it to 4 or 5 family members, because they did think that they were doing the right thing. So we don't want to disparage what our family members were doing, but we want to get the point across that proper estate planning is the best way to protect that asset.
Now, when it comes to this just in whole, because it kind of, I'm not gonna lie, like at times it sort of felt like a losing battle, hearing the numbers and then also feeling so, even on a personal level, feeling like our families are kind of separate and all of that. Why is this documentary important, especially for Black people?
Well, I can tell you there's different levels that I was attempting to kind of reach with the documentary. And of course, you want to tell people like this is the issue, because a lot of people don't know, that the issue exists. And just as a footnote, it isn't just farmland. Like, New Orleans, where Tharlyn's at, and I'll be going to, a lot of that land was lost because no one had clear title to. I mean, a lot of the houses were lost because there was a clear title to the home. The elders passed and they just left it to the people who were living there. So when the hurricane came and it was time to get, settle up with insurance and FEMA, hey, how do you know who owns this house? So, and it's happening in New York right now. But I think it's important to inform people. But I also wanted to show, and this is like a less tangible, result, was the families that we highlighted. We showed how their units are really tight, and how the Eli family in particular, this kind of brought them together and gave them a common purpose. Like, we have to protect our land. So they came together, they formed committees, and they got organized around maintaining this. And this was it was interesting because I had a very personal ideology about families coming together to solve family issues, and not families kind of being broken up in their silos. And like, if our cousin Kim is trying to go to college, the only people that's concerned about Kim going to college is her mom and daddy. I'm like, no, this is our family. If we get together as a family, and it's like, hey, I may know the person who does admissions, or I may know the person who does grants, or somebody else in the family. So my ideology is one of the things that I wanted to discover, and luckily I did. And I call that the kind of my Wakanda moment, when all of the tribes in Wakanda got together to discuss the problem amongst the whole community, and not just like one tribe be like, hey, that's y'all problem.
So it's like a reminder of like how, as family, what family really means.
Right.
So you're telling the story of how we lost a lot of farmland. A lot of families have lost farmland, but it's also, this is how we should be acting. We're not just one, your nuclear, your one family, your entire generation lineage.
And how you can retain it, and how as a family unit you can operate this unit as a business, and how you can operate this business and create a legacy, and how you can close this wealth gap and also build it at the same time. Right. And so that's why it was so important, running the LEAP Coalition. And we call it our own ecosystem, because the LEAP Coalition is John Deere, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and the National Black Growers Council. We also have the Centers for Heirs Property and the Federation, that are boots on the ground organizations that are helping families directly solve heirs property issues. But the whole nexus behind the LEAP Coalition is to help people to solve the issues, gain clear title, to their land. But once they claim clear title to their land, we want to make sure that they're productive, making sure that they're creating a legacy to their land, making sure that they're prosperous. And so that's where the National Black Growers Council comes into to play, because not all families, to Eternal's point, it's not all farmland, and not everyone wants to be a farmer. So you may have timber on your land. You may have land here. Say, what do I do with it? So that's where the National Black Growers Council comes into play, and they say, hey, we'll lease this land for you. And so here you build up this asset where then you can put kids through college. You build up this fortune, so to speak, this legacy, this wealth that you then, as a business, as a family business, that you have intact. And so you have the Centers for Heirs Property that helps you curate this forestry for you. They have a forestry division. And so these are the things that we're helping to provide these resources for family. And one of the points too, I think that Eternal was alluding to, is that, this documentary is building awareness to families, and some families that don't even know that they had heirs property until they've watched it and say, I think this is what our family has. And as we've done these film festivals, a lot of the conversations and a lot of the dialogue happens after the documentary. We spend most of the time in the hallways, outside, talking to folks after the documentary. And just as I'm talking to you now, I've had 2 Teams messages pop up from submissions of folks asking about heirs property and how we can help them, just as I'm talking to you now. So it is very fluid. It is very real in our heirs property can happen to anyone, to any culture, to any race, but it is just far more prolific in the Black community.
And
Yeah.
to and just to piggyback on that, just to give you like a sort of a framework of this, when she says it can happen to anyone, there's different stages of this. So, you may not have heirs property, but you may have property and not know what you can do with it. Because that's
Right.
one of the biggest things. It's like, we have 400 acres. What do we do with it? And I just met someone who was like higher up in Marriott. Like, when I say high, like global title. And she saw a clip of the film in at Tribeca and came to me afterwards and said, hey, we just got our land into a trust, but we have no idea what to do with it. I said, well, Center for Heirs Property, Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and I connected her with Tharlyn directly. I said, you could talk to the lead manager directly, because that's the other thing. Like, if someone came to you right now and said you had 1,000 acres, most people be like, what am I going to do with 1,000 acres? And that is one of the reasons sometimes people will just say, hey, I don't want to deal with it, and they sell. So there's whether you're an heirs property or not, it's like, how do we keep people retain the land that they have, make it useful,
Make it productive.
And
Exactly.
as Tharlyn said, make it productive where it can benefit you financially. And there's so many ways, and that's one of the things that I learned making the film, was all the different ways. But my mind was blown when I found that you can make money not doing anything with the land.
No, right. So when I was listening, I don't know how much or if we even have land still. And it sucks because in I think it's called like Furbyville, if I'm not mistaken, like South Carolina, my family owned like a lot of the land in the town. And my grandmother always talked about them selling. And it's just like, it's when you hear all of this stuff, and when I watched it, and I was like, because I'm from up north, I have no desire outside of to visit. But when I was hearing all the ways that you can outsource it, it opened up my eyes. Like, oh my God, we need to look into where our land is.
Exactly.
Like, we're losing so much money because we don't realize that there is so much money outside of farming.
And the fact, like, you make a very good point. We don't look at it as an asset, right? And that's the other piece too, is that we have to look at it as an asset. And even if we're not working the land, there are others out there that can work the land for us. And we're not getting any more land. There's not any more land that's out there growing for us. that's going to come and magically appear. There's not anymore. So we have to, that whole moving up north, and then that Black migration to the north, that's another piece of the trauma that happened to Black Americans. And so many of us, we were a product of our families moving north. And even in my own family, my mother was from South Carolina, and she's like, I'm not going back. Whatever happens, I'm done. It's over. And so much of that land, she was disenfranchised from so much of the land that's still there in Jenkinsville, South Carolina, that they're just not going back to. And so you're absolutely right. So we have just left and been just so dismissed from so much of the assets that are probably there that others are now benefiting from, that we have just walked away from, that have just been lost, that we can't even quantify because no one has managed it for years. And we have just walked away to what we think is a better life.
Yeah. No, I agree. And so I guess my question now is, for me, my family's big. We're extremely close. Our last family reunion, and it's been a while, but it was my grandfather's father's lineage. So it was everybody that was on my grandfather and his two siblings. So it was hundreds of us. Mm-hmm. But not every Black family is like that. Right. And a lot of Black families don't even have a relationship with their family in other areas. So what can they do? Is there any way to find any type of land, or is it just go buy land now and build that wealth that way?
I think what is two things is, and that's why the family component of this was really important to me to show, because we really could have just did this and just had all talking heads, did not see anybody at a reunion, did not see people doing that. But I know that's a cultural identity for us, family reunion, getting together. How do we kind of come together in these communal kind of ways? And so it was really important to show that. And I think that what a lot of people, like the people that my personal friends who know about this project, that were with me in the editing room looking at it, and they will leave like, hey man, I gotta make a phone call real quick. What's going on? And it becomes the thing, and I hope, and this is what I hope when people see it, it becomes the thing that people say, this is how we can come together.
Yes.
On the issue of this land. And when you know how important it is, and when you can, if you have a child now and you plant a crop of trees, and by the time they're ready to go to college, you can cut those trees, and that's the money for college. Yes. So, things of that nature. And that's what I'm really hoping. But I also think part of I think it's revolutionary right now to buy land. Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed, and we talked about it, young people being in agriculture, young people saying, hey, look, you know what, we want to have spaces, and I push this to heal, to have peace, to go and have some measure of freedom. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to show how beautiful the country was. I wanted us to see, this is what we're missing out on. Like, I get it. I grew up in Indiana. My parents are from the South. I lived in New York for 27 years, but I always wanted to be outside in nature. And I always thought it was beautiful. And I hated that so many Black folks were looking at land as whether it was like the racism attached to it, or oppressive, or it wasn't what we do. But then when you look at this film and you see, and this was really why my mind was blown to hear about Black people owning 8,000 acres of land. I'm like, how is that possible?
And that's the beauty, and that's the beauty of it too, to Eternal is how you were able to create this masterpiece and create it in such a beautiful way. And you talk about, how do we do this? Do we buy land? What do we do? How does it start? It starts with a conversation, right? It starts with a conversation in the family. You starts with, as Eternal said, it starts at family reunions. It starts with education. You know, we talk about the LEAP coalition, that the organization that I run, LEAP is an acronym, and it's an acronym for legislation, education, advocacy, and production systems. And that E, education, I always say, you know, how do we bring sexy back? And that's what I talk about, bringing sexy back from education, you know, through agriculture, agribusiness, and going to HBCUs and talking to, you know, schools and talking to students and helping them to enhance agribusiness and curriculums, because we have to get to the young folks, because they have to see that this is important in terms of a legacy. And so that is what we have to do. And then purchasing new land, as Eternal says, but we have to educate. We have to start having conversations and let people know that it is very important, that land is important, and that we have to keep the land in the family. Don't sell it, keep it, right? And, you know, we have to bring our families together. And it's just very important. And the way that Eternal has crafted and curated this film, I think it is one of the, I will say, probably the most, in the most beautiful way, the only film that you probably will see where farmers and Black folks in this genre has been filmed beautifully, and the land has been filmed beautifully, you know, and you don't get to see Black farmers in this light, right? And I think people are just amazed, like he said, that you'll see farmers with 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 acres, and the people probably thought they were unicorns, right? But they do exist. And so that, I think it starts with the conversation. We just can't be afraid to talk about this in our family. We can't.
I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know we were row crop farmers at all.
Yes.
Like I thought when people talk about, I have an acre of land and stuff, and I'm like, okay, like that's a lie. So when I was hearing these numbers, and I can't remember the gentleman that was speaking when before he joined the group, and they were
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, there's
PJ
one
Haney,
of
yeah.
us. And
Yes.
so, as we're speaking now, and as I'm remembering the documentary, it's that it so much is about family, community, going back to a village. It takes a village. So it's sort of like really reminding us of how we're supposed to be. And outside of the outside forces that are telling us, oh, this is how society tells us, but in our Black families, this is how we're supposed to be, having a community, because it seems like even to get this done, it was a labor of love, and it was a
You know,
community effort.
and one thing I will challenge you with this, because I say this all the time. We can't continue to believe what we hear. This is how Black families are. This is how Black families are. If you look at the Haney family, you look at the Bridgeforth family, you look at the Hunter family, you look at the Robinson Eli family, and I can go on and on and on. This is how Black families are. These are fifth, sixth generation families. This is how families are. So we can't continue to believe the other narrative that they aren't. This is how families are.
But that's what I'm saying. That's why it was so important, because um I do think when it comes to us, we think it's a dime a dozen. It's a once in a million
Right,
year, multiple generations of your family. And
right,
I'm not gonna lie, it did make me want to have another film reunion. Like, because I
right.
was like, we have to get on it, but also with a purpose.
The
Like I
purpose.
love that it was like, and who was it? He also works at John Deere.
Mark
Mark,
House.
yeah.
Who
Mm-hmm.
has the land for the family, who bought
Mm-hmm.
the compound. I
Yeah.
thought that was so amazing. And it's like, to see it done, this is, to me, it's a very important story, but I think it's also important to show the family dynamic generationally.
And that is why it's so, again, when I say talk about the conversation, that's why it's so important. And that's the work that the Centers for Heirs Property and the Federation does. This whole process, as I tell people, it's not a transactional process. It isn't like going to a market or to a store and going in and say, I'm going to buy some corn, or I'm going to buy some bread or milk, and I'm just going to go in, walk down the aisle, grab my buggy, go buy it, and go to the checkout aisle, and I'm done. This can take months and it can take years, but they take you through a process. One, you have to identify the family members. Then you have to go through and come to an agreement. Then you have to decide what you want to do. Then they help you to establish maybe an LLC to determine what we want to do and how we want to form as this family unit and as a business unit. So they take you through this entire process before you even determine what it is that you want to do. So that is why it's so important. And through this whole process, you're building and strengthening this foundation, this family foundation, while you're going through this process. So here's the whole beauty behind going through this whole process of heirs property.
I like that. Okay, so to bring it up, this is a great conversation to be I love it. Now, so 326 billion, is that correct? That was the number?
Yeah.
Hey, Eternal, that's the low number, right?
Well, yes, because that's not even including beaches or urban areas. I was like, this is not like, I feel so robbed. Like 326 billion, you know, when people talk about, well, why aren't Black people wealthy and all of that? And it's like, there's so many examples of when we had opportunities of wealth and it was just stripped from us, you know. That was one of the craziest things outside of, so there were two mind-blowing things I want to say that I learned. The 326 billion, that was a small portion of the theft of land and the money revenue that we could have had, as well as I believe you said it was 30 days for loans, and then 100 for Black loans.
20 days.
And then the season would start, and this is to really outline what was done to take our land. Those were the two things that were like really mind blown for me. But that's for me. So for you guys, and it may not even be in the documentary, what's at least one or two things that really opened your eyes in this journey, from just knowing that you think we should all be aware of?
I'll let you go, Eternal.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, all of this stuff, you gotta imagine, I knew absolutely nothing about this. So I was continually getting, my mind was being blown. Like when I heard the 20 million acres, I'm like, well, how did we get 20 million acres? Like, it was just kept like unfolding, and it was just question after question. And that's why I wanted to show it in the documentary, that if I had these questions, I'm sure other people were like, well, how did we get 20 million acres? And then how did we lose it? And the 326 billion you talk of. But I'm gonna tell you something that really, really just kind of put this all in perspective and really just kind of blew my mind. And I'm like, this is why history is so important. When we were going to do the stock footage for this, like the old footage and the old photographs, we went to the Library of Congress to find some of the stuff. And we came across a pastor who was also a hobby filmmaker. And now this is back when cameras first came out. Like literally when they first came out, he was going around just shooting everyday Black life. And you see that when you see the old pictures with the people in the cars leaving. One of the things we didn't put in there, because it wasn't really, connected to our story, there was a guy who had 2 oil wells. And this is back in the early 1900s. Black man with oil wells. And I was like, what? And you're looking at him like, okay, this is one oil well. And then he's pointing, and then they cut to him in another oil well. And I was like, wait a minute. We have oil wells? and it's just sort of like, when you hear stuff like that, and you see like how far we are away from having oil right now, you say to yourself, man, this this kind of stuff is crazy, and it's happening. You know, you talk about Tulsa, you talk about Greenwood, you talk about all the Black towns like Seneca Village and all that other stuff. And then you hear stuff like oil wells, and we know how much money comes from like petroleum. To know that there was like, I'm sure he wasn't the only one. To know that someone had oil wells at that time, it just kind of illustrates how much we were able to accomplish and also how much was taken from us. So that's the one thing. It wasn't in the film, but it was in the course of making it that I found out. And I was just like, wow.
First off, mind blown. That's why I was like,
I think, yeah, yeah. I think for me, I think it still is unraveling for me. My mind continues to be blown. I am just amazed at the tenacity of the brilliance of Black folks, that for generations just outside of slavery, that men and women had the audacity, had the presence of mind to own property, and to this day that their descendants still have it, have in some ways perfected it. Some family members now own cotton gins, own rice mills, have multiplied their acreage. I am still in awe. My mouth still just drops. I have watched grown men cry when they talk about wanting to retain the land that their grandfather or their great grandfather has held. I tell people all the time, I'm a daddy's girl. So all it takes is for a man to drop a tear and I'm done. And it just continues to just baffle me at the sheer resilience of Black folks. And so with that, this entire process, I tell people that, the work that I do is not a project, because a project by definition has a start and an end date. And this is not a project. This is a lifelong work. It'll be work that I hope stops. We always say we hope that heirs property we eradicate it like polio, but I hope through this work that we're doing, we get one family. If we get one family who is able to secure their land and able to prosper from it, we've done our job. And I am just continually in awe. I tell people all the time, Eternal has the perfect name, because I know I'll know this brother forever. I said, so knowing him, that was just one, cherry on top. So just meeting these families, this work is just by far just God's work. And I'm just continually in awe.
What's one thing that you really want people to take away? Because I feel like although this is a documentary, it's really like a call to action. It's like also steps. It's not just informing and educating, but it's also like an assist, which is something I think is a little bit rare in documentaries. They kind of just tell the story, but not a lot of times lead you into action. So what's just one or maybe a few things that you hope Black families, young Black people do after watching or take away from this?
Well, for me personally, I want us to reestablish that connection to the land, because if you think about the societies we come from and being brought here specifically to cultivate this land, because we had the know-how, we had the experience, and that was within us, and to see how disconnected we are from it. I always say this, and I'll continue to say it. I believe it's the source of our healing. And that's whether that's financial, whether that's spiritual, whether that's emotional, whether that's mental. I think our connection to it will be the source of our healing. And that's what I want people to feel like, I need to go get some land and I need to figure out ways that we can build off it, but also that we connect to it spiritually and connect to what it can provide us outside of the financial gains, because I believe there's a lot for us to reap from it other than that.
I would just add to that, I would just like for everyone to know that they're not alone, that you are not in a silo, and that, you know, there are families out here with these issues, but that there are resources out here that can help families through this process. And this film, I think, does represent healing for a lot of families as well. And so, in addition to the call to action, in addition to having the resources there that we have documented there for families as well, you know, that, you know, you're just not alone. And I hope that people are able to take that away once they see the documentary.
Thank you so much for the
Yes.
conversation. I'm so appreciative for this documentary. I think it's going to actually change a lot. And I didn't get into this because I think we were kind of on very necessary topics, and it was a great conversation. But there are a lot of young real estate, you know, a lot of young people in real estate, and I think this would be important for them to see that, you know, the Airbnbs are cool and all of that, but like getting that land, and I
Yes,
think it'll really help. So I just want to say thank you guys so much. I
absolutely.
truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us. Absolutely. Continue your work as well.